Hey, greetings everybody. Gleekon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode, we kind of continued in Of Blood and Honor, a short novella. So far, it's been about Tirion forging and his encounter with some mysterious lone orc. So stay a while and listen to Chapter 3 as we continue our tale. As a matter of fact, this one's called A Warrior's Tale. Tyrion woke early the next morning. Slipping out of bed so as not to wake Karandra, he dressed and made his way down to his personal ready room. There, displayed upon an ornate stand near the darkened room's center, was his armor. The heavy silver plates with their gold lining shone brightly in the early morning light, despite the numerous gouges and dents that covered them. Scars of battle, he thought warily. Any one of the deep gouges could have signified a fatal wound had he been a less cautious man over the years. He hoped silently that his luck would hold out with whatever troubles were coming. As quietly as he could, he slipped the armor plates on one at a time and buckled them into place. Once finished, he stood in front of a full-length mirror and looked himself over. He looked much the same as he always had, despite a few more gray hairs framing his tired face. He marveled at how well the heavy suit still fit after all these years. He had to admit to feeling a certain indestructibility every time he wore the armor, yet that was a young man's notion. No one was invincible. No one lived forever, he thought grimly. Walking over to the stone fireplace set into the far wall, Tyrion reached out for his trusty warhammer, which rested on the oak mantel above. The expertly weighted hammer felt good in his hands. The holy runes etched in its head shone as brightly as they ever had. "With any luck, I won't need your strength today, old friend," he muttered. He tucked the hammer under his arm and strode down toward the keep stables. The sun was just breaking over the distant Alterac peaks as Tyrion finished saddling Mirador. He slung the hammer into its saddle hoop and made ready to mount the seasoned warhorse. He put his foot in the stirrup and grunted in pain. His ribs still ached, and the heavy armor made it difficult for him to pull his own weight up. "May I ask what you're doing?" a suspicious voice asked from the stable's dark entryway. Tyrion took his foot from the stirrup and turned to face Arden. The captain of the guard's face was stern and etched with concern. "I am going to investigate the tower's ruins. If the orcs are planning an invasion of my land, then I'll find proof of it myself," Tyrion said flatly. Arden nodded. "Great, then I'll saddle up and go with you." "I do not wish to have company. This is something I must do alone, Arden," Tyrion said. There was iron in his voice, and the captain's concern grew more apparent. "I don't like this, Tyrion. What exactly are you trying to prove? Heading off unescorted so soon after you?" Tyrion cut him off. "My what, Arden? My defeat?" Tyrion asked heatedly. Arden lowered his gaze and shifted uncomfortably. Tyrion mounted the horse, exhaled deeply, and curtly said, "I'll be back in a few hours. Try to keep an eye on Barthas while I'm gone. I have a feeling he'll try to stir up trouble." He dug his spurs into Mirador's sides and sped out toward the distant tree line. With growing unease, Arden watched his lord gallop away into the distance. Somehow he knew that Tyrion wasn't telling him everything. Finding his way back to the ruined tower wasn't as easy a task as Tyrion had thought it would be. It took him hours to wind his way back up the mountain trail. The morning fog still clung to the ground along the winding path, but he could still make out the tower's broken frame through the trees. As he neared it, he slowed to an easy canter, attuned to any sounds of danger. This is not a wise move, he thought, approaching his enemy's encampment without so much as a squire to aid him. His horse's heavy barding and his own flashing armor were enough to announce his presence to anyone from miles around. "Need to be more cautious," he thought. After all, there was still a good chance that the orc had not been alone when he encountered it. Yet something in his gut told him that this was not the case. Something deep inside told him that he had nothing to fear. Throwing caution to the wind, Tyrion rode boldly up to the tower's base and dismounted. Looking up, he could see where the once mighty walls had collapsed inward. The structural damage to the tower was extensive, and he wondered fleetingly how he could have survived the disaster at all. He looked about the place for any sign of the orc. He saw none. The tower looked deserted. A low guttural grunt caught his attention, and he turned to see the orc sitting on a large rock near the tree line. The creature seemed calm and poised, but its great battle-axe leaned nearby within easy reach. So the creature too was cautious, Tyrion thought to himself. The proud paladin removed his helmet and set it on the pommel of Mirador's saddle. The great horse snorted loudly, sensing its master's tension. From the corner of his eye, Tyrion caught sight of the warhammer strapped to the saddle and reached for its handle. Immediately the orc grabbed for his axe. Tyrion quickly pulled his hand away and took a step back from the horse. The orc grunted softly and relaxed. It grinned at him knowingly. Tyrion took a deep breath and then walked slowly toward the orc. As he walked forward, he realized that he could have been sorely mistaken about the old orc. Perhaps the creature did intend to kill him after all. Maybe someone else had miraculously saved him from the tower's wreckage. Maybe. But he had to know for sure one way or another. Stopping only a few paces from where the orc sat, Tyrion raised his fist to his heart in salute. That had been the orc's salute, right? In return, the orc raised a stiff hand to his own grizzled brow. "That is how you humans do it, is it not?" the orc asked in fluid speech. His voice was deep and gritty, but its articulation was exceptional. Tyrion was dumbfounded, the shock evident on his face. The orc's hideous features contorted in what Tyrion surmised was a grin. You speak our language?" Tyrion asked shakily. The old orc eyed him sternly. "Do you think my people survived in your world this long using brute strength alone?" it asked. "Your kind has always underestimated mine. That is why you lost the first war, I think." Tyrion could only marvel at the creature. Here sat a thing of darkness, a vile murdering beast, and yet it spoke with fluidity and wit. This creature did not rush to tear out his heart as he would have expected. It merely sat, reading him with its clever, knowing eyes. Tyrion shuddered, feeling fascinated and repulsed at the same time. Without thinking, he blurted out the question he had been asking himself ceaselessly. "I must know. Did you pull me from the tower and lead my horse back to the road?" The orc held him in his gaze for a long while and then nodded once. "I did," it said. Tyrion exhaled sharply. "Why would you do that?" he asked. "We are sworn enemies." The orc seemed to consider the point for a moment. "You have great honor for a human. That much was clear from our fight. No honorable warrior deserves to die like a trapped animal. It would not have been right to simply leave you there," the orc finished. Tyrion didn't know exactly what he had expected to hear, but he was clearly unprepared for that answer. "Besides," the orc continued, "I have seen enough death in my time." Tyrion bowed his head, struggling to make sense of the orc's words. This can't be right, he thought. This creature is a merciless savage. How could it speak so? Yet Tyrion knew that the orc's words rang true. He could feel the orc's sincerity, and beneath it, deeply buried pain and sorrow. As a paladin, he had developed a certain empathic ability to sense deep emotions from others. The curious ability had never proven to be more useful. He pulled himself together and simply went with the moment. "I should thank you, then," Tyrion began, wondering how to properly address the creature. Sensing Tyrion's confusion, the orc spoke. "I am Eitrigg, human. You may call me Eitrigg." Relieved, Tyrion replied, "Thank you, Eitrigg. Thank you for saving my life. I was right." The orc nodded again and stood up. Tyrion noticed that the orc walked with a distinct limp. He surmised that the cut he had given the creature during their battle was likely infected. Without giving Tyrion a second glance, the orc limped over toward the ruined tower. "I'm Tirion Faldring," the paladin began. "I should tell you that I am the lord of this land, Eitrigg, and that your presence here upsets many of those whom I entrust with its protection." The orc laughed softly. "I wager they slept well enough before you found me," the orc said. "I have lived here in these woods for many long years, human. I move from place to place, keeping hidden, finding shelter where I can. I have made great sport of evading your scouts and your rangers." The latter was spoken with distinct scorn. Orcs were not known for their fondness of elven rangers. The cunning forest-running rangers had sworn to gain vengeance against the horde after the orcs had destroyed the elves' enchanted homeland of Quel'Thalas. Tyrion wondered if Eitrigg was telling the truth. Could this orc have remained undetected for so long? Eitrigg snorted and said, "It was bad luck that led you to me." "Perhaps," Tyrion began, "but your being here creates a serious problem for me. My people hate your kind, Eitrigg. Your race brought nothing but misery and chaos to these lands. They would kill you in a heartbeat if they could. How then can I be merciful? How can I let you stay, knowing what your people have done?" "I have abandoned them, human. I live here in solitude, in exile," Eitrigg said warily. "I no longer wish to pay for their sins." "I don't understand," the paladin replied. "Are you saying that you've disavowed your own people?" "My people are lost," the orc spat.
Truth be told, they were lost long before they ever came to this strange world. When the Horde finally fell before your standards, I decided to take my leave of it forever.
Eitrigg reached down and rolled a large chunk of mortar onto its side. Tyrion was impressed with the orc's strength. It would have taken at least 2 stout men to move the stone. The orc motioned for Tyrion to sit, and then sat himself down, cross-legged on the ground. Tyrion took a seat on the leveled mortar.
There is much you do not know about my people. Their honor and their pride left them long ago. I decided my duty to them was finished when my sons were killed.
Eitrigg said grimly.
Were your sons warriors?
Eitrigg asked. Tyrion asked. Eitrigg scoffed loudly.
All orcs are warriors, human,
he said, as if Tyrion were a brainless child.
We know little else. Despite my son's strength and prowess, they were betrayed by their own leaders. During the last war, our clan chieftains fought amongst themselves over petty rivalries. As one particularly bloody battle concluded, my sons were ordered to pull back from the front lines. One of our chieftain's rivals, hoping to advance his clan's standing within the Horde, countermanded the order, sent my sons and their brethren back to be slaughtered. It was a dark day for our clan,
Eitrigg said, lost in thought.
A dark day for me,
he finished. Tyrion's mind reeled. He was well aware of the fact that orcs frequently fought amongst themselves, yet Eitrigg's apparent grief moved him. He never imagined that such treachery could so affect an orc.
I realized then that there was no hope. Corruption and enmity completely overshadowed my people's spirit. I felt that it was only a matter of time before the Horde devoured itself from within.
Eitrigg said.
Where did the corruption come from, Eitrigg? What drove your people to such depravity?
Tyrion asked. Eitrigg's brow raised, and he appeared to be deep in thought.
In my grandmother's time, my people were simple and proud. There were a few dozen clans then. They lived and hunted within the wilds of our world. They were all hunters back then, mighty warriors who lived by an honorable code and worshipped the spirits of the elements themselves. Thunder and lightning coursed through the blood of my ancestors,
Eitrigg said proudly, lost in the haze of reverie.
Wise shamans guided them and kept the peace between the clans.
Tyrion leaned in, hanging on the old orc's words. Surely no human ears had ever heard this much of the orc's history before.
And then,
Tyrion asked anxiously. He wondered if this was how Talon felt as he read the boy's stories before his bedtime. Eitrigg continued somberly.
A new order rose up amongst the clans, promising to unite them, forge them into a powerful nation. Many of the shamans discarded their ancient traditions and began to practice dark magics. They began to call themselves warlocks. For some malign purpose, they used their shadowy powers to corrupt the clans and drive them to heinous acts of violence. They did succeed in uniting my people after a fashion,
Eitrigg stated wryly.
Under the warlock's rule, the clans were united as a rampaging horde. Our noble warrior traditions were perverted to serve their dark, secretive ends. It was the warlocks who brought my people to your world, human. It was they who drove us to make war against you.
Tyrion shook his head in bewilderment.
No one spoke out against them. Out of an entire race of warriors, no one was willing to fight them,
Tyrion asked heatedly.
There were a few who would not submit. One of the dissident clans, led by an orc named Durotan, challenged the warlocks openly, tried to convince the other clans of their folly. I remember the mighty Durotan well. He was a great hero. Unfortunately, few orcs heeded Durotan's warnings. The warlocks heard that a hold over their hearts blinded them to reason. For his courage, Durotan was exiled along with his clan. I heard that the warlock's assassins finally killed him years later. Such is the way of the Horde.
Eitrigg finished.
Madness, Tyrion said. If your people truly valued honor, as you said, then I can't believe that they let themselves be controlled so easily.
Eitrigg scowled and sat silently for a moment. He looked up with stern eyes and replied,
It was a terrible momentum that gripped us in those days, human. After Duraton was taken away, fear and paranoia overtook my people. None would stand against the warlocks.
Tyrion scoffed derisively. Bristling with anger, Eitrigg erupted.
Have you ever stood against the will of an entire nation, human? Have you ever questioned an order, knowing that to disobey meant immediate death?
Tyrion looked away. No. He could scarcely imagine what that must have been like. Eitrigg nodded, feeling his point had been made.
It was rumored that the warlocks consorted with demons and drew on their infernal powers. Personally, I believe it to be true. The darkness that took hold of my people could not have been born in our hearts.
Well, yeah, and also, like if you think about Rise of the Horde, they saw them with demons. Tyrion tensed. He remembered hearing that the orcs had set demons loose to sow terror throughout the human ranks. The very thought appalled him. Seems your people have suffered greatly, Eitrigg, even before they roused the wrath of mine, Tyrion said with a note of pride in his voice. Eitrigg gave him a sidelong glance. However, your story is a remarkable one. I fear I may have misjudged you and your people along many lines. Eitrigg grunted as if amused and stood up to stretch his back. Actually, Tyrion continued, we are much alike, you and I. We are both old soldiers who have sacrificed much for our... Eitrigg cut him off with a wave of his sinewy hand.
We are nothing alike, human,
he growled.
I'm a renegade living as an exile in a hostile land. You are a wealthy lord, loved by a free people, able to live life as you wish. We are nothing alike.
Embarrassed by his outburst, the old orc scowled and looked away into the distance. Tyrion considered the orc's harsh words for a moment. You are right, of course. Our people are at war. Thus I must ask you, Eitrigg, on your honor. Are there any other orcs in my land? Does the Horde plan to attack this region? Eitrigg sighed heavily and sat back down. He shook his head in dismay and looked Tyrion in the eye.
As I have told you, human, I live here alone. I have no interest in dealing with others of my kind. I haven't even seen another orc in years. I cannot tell you what the Horde plans now. I can only assure you that this broken old warrior has no plans to assault your keep, or make any trouble for you whatsoever. I just want to be left alone to live out my remaining years in solitude. After a lifetime of fruitless war, peace is the only comfort I have left.
Tyrion nodded. As a warrior of honor, I accept your words, Eitrigg, and in return for having saved my life, I will allow you your solitude. So long as you remain hidden and leave my people unmolested, you may stay here for as long as you wish. Eitrigg smirked slightly in disbelief.
I think perhaps your brethren will hunt me down to spite you, human. To them I am the sum of their fears,
the old orc said. Yet I am the Lord, Eitrigg. They shall do as I say. I give you my solemn oath as a light-sworn paladin that your secret will be safe. None shall hunt you while I have power to prevent it, Tyrion vowed. For a brief moment, Tyrion regretted making such a bold statement. He knew it would be extremely difficult to fulfill his charge if matters became complicated. If his comrades ever found out that he had made such a pact, they would certainly brand him as a traitor. However, his instincts told him that this was the right decision. He stood, resolved. Eitrigg grunted in satisfaction.
On your honor, then,
he said, rising to his feet once more. Tyrion noticed the orc's limp again. Eitrigg was obviously in great pain. On my honor, Tyrion replied, gazing at the orc's wounded leg. No, Eitrigg, I can heal your wound. It is a power I have, he said. The orc chuckled in amusement.
Thank you, but it is not necessary,
Eitrigg stated.
Pain is a great teacher. Apparently, even after all my battles, I still have much to learn.
Tyrion laughed out loud. He was truly beginning to like the old orc, who not an hour before he considered to be the most heinous villain. Perhaps someday I can return and converse with you further. I must admit you are not at all what I expected to find, the paladin chided. Eitrigg's massive yellow tusks seemed to stretch as he smiled.
Nor are you what I expected, human.
Tyrion gave the orc's salute again and mounted Mirador with a grunt. He dug his spurs into the stallion's flank and rode off beyond the orc's sight. 1,000 different thoughts flooded Tyrion's mind as he rode home along the winding path. He wondered if he had made a mistake by offering the orc sanctuary in his lands. Nevertheless, he had given his word that he would keep the orc's secret safe. Whatever else happened, he was honor-bound to protect the old orc from persecution, and that was that. It was nearly dusk as he rode back into the keep stables. Tiredly, Tyrion handed his reins to the stable boy and headed inside. All he wanted was to sleep and clear the day's business from his mind. As he reached for the door handle that led into the kitchens, a strong hand caught his arm. Tyrion looked up to find Bartholus blocking his way. There was a light in the youth's eyes that made Tyrion very uneasy. "My lord," Bartholus began icily, "we must talk immediately." Tyrion sighed in frustration. "I'm very tired, Bartholus. We can talk in the morning if you wish." Bartholus's grip only tightened. "I don't think you understand, my lord. You see, I know where you were today," the young paladin stated. His eyes never blinked but held Tyrion in their frosty depths. Tyrion wondered if Arden had betrayed him and told of his errand. No, Arden had always been loyal. "I know that there are orcs in Hearthglen, Tyrion. I can see it in your eyes. I pray for your sake that you're not covering up any pertinent information." Tyrion bristled. He could handle the youth's arrogance, but he would not be threatened in his own home by an overly zealous boy. "I told you before, Bartholus, you will address me with the proper respect," Tyrion stated furiously. "As for your concerns, I have determined that my encounter was an isolated incident. That's all you need to know for the time being. I suggest that you forget about this business and let the matter drop. Now take your hand away and let me pass before I lose my temper." Slowly, Bartholus released his grip and took a step back. His piercing eyes never left Tyrion's. The elder paladin turned brusquely and entered the keep. Left standing alone, Bartholus scowled in frustration. "This is not over, my lord," the young paladin hissed to himself, clenching his fists. "This is not over by far." Tyrion made his way to his private chambers. He ceremoniously removed his armor and placed his warhammer back upon the mantle. He entered his bedroom and crashed down heavily on the bed. All he wanted in the world was just a few hours of sleep. Just as his head hit the plush pillow, Corandra walked into the room. She was surprised to find him there. "Oh, you're home," she said sweetly. "Where did you go running off to this morning, Tyrion? I asked Arden, but he wouldn't tell me anything." Her voice was full of concern. Tyrion tensed. He didn't want to discuss the matter about the orc at all. He had given his word to keep Eitrigg's secret safe, and the last thing he wanted was to be forced to lie to his wife about his activities. But looking into her eyes, Tyrion could tell she wasn't going to settle for anything less than the whole story. "I went out to inspect the site where I fought the orc, Corandra. I needed to find out if there were more orcs in my lands," he said a tad too irritably. "I wanted to go alone, so I told Arden not to speak about it with anyone." Corandra frowned and folded her arms under her breasts. She did that every time she was upset with him. "You went off alone only days after your attack. How can you be so reckless, Tyrion? What were you trying to prove? It's not like you're a young man anymore," she said heatedly. Tyrion flinched. First Bartholus and now his wife. "I've been soldiering for more years than you've been alive, girl. The last thing I need from you is a lecture on how to perform my duties properly," he growled. Tyrion rarely spoke to her like that, and Corandra never really knew how to respond when he did. She decided that a tactical change of subject was needed in order to salvage the conversation. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked, trying to make her voice sound as innocent as possible. Tyrion forced himself to calm down, but knew that this new line of questioning wouldn't fare well for her either. "Yes, I did," he said in an even tone. "I am convinced that my encounter was an isolated event and that we have nothing to fear from the orcs." Corandra brightened and sat down beside him on the bed. She took his hand in hers. "I'm so relieved. That's wonderful, Tyrion. But how can you be so sure?" she asked. Tyrion's heart sank. He would not lie to her. "I can't tell you, my love," he said softly. "Why not? If there's nothing to fear, as you say, then there shouldn't be any problem with telling me, should there?" she asked. Something in her voice sounded hurt. "It's a matter of honor, Corandra. I cannot tell you," he repeated. With a start, Corandra ripped her hand away and stood up from the bed. Tyrion half expected lightning bolts to burst forth from her eyes. "Honor? It always comes down to that with you, Tyrion. You're just as exasperating as that vainglorious Bartholus. Is your precious honor really more important to you than your own wife?" She cupped her face with her hands and seemed to be on the verge of tears. Tyrion looked up at her and answered as gently as he could. "You wouldn't understand, my love. I am a paladin. There's a great deal expected of me," he said, his voice trailing off. There was an uncharacteristic note of self-pity in his tone. Corandra took her hands from her face and had to restrain herself from hitting him. You're right, I don't understand. But I know exactly what's expected of you, she yelled as tears started flowing down her reddening cheeks. You're expected to act like my husband and not to try to shelter me from your silly little secrets, like I'm still a girl in pigtails. You're expected to act like a responsible lord and not go gallivanting off alone and putting yourself in danger. Tyrion looked away as she began to sob. You're supposed to be careful and stay alive so that our son doesn't grow up without a father, she finished. Tyrion stood up and took her in his arms. I know, dearest, I did take an unnecessary risk. You've got to trust me on this, Karandra. Everything will be all right, he told her soothingly. She wiped the tears from her eyes and looked at her husband's face. She would try to trust his judgment. She was about to tell him as much when a quiet shuffling of feet announced that Talon had entered the room. Tyrion and Karandra looked toward the door to see their bleary-eyed son standing before them. Apparently, their arguing had woken the boy up. Are you two fighting? The boy asked timidly, his big blue eyes glistening with concern. Tyrion walked over and scooped the boy up in his arms. No, son, your mother's just worried about the orcs, so, he said soothingly. Talon seemed to think for a moment. Papa, are the orcs as mean and cruel as everyone says they are? The boy asked. Tyrion wasn't prepared for such a direct question. He thought about his revealing conversation with Eitrigg and marveled that he wasn't so sure anymore. He certainly didn't want to lie to his son. There had to be some hope for future generations. Well, son, that's hard to answer, he said slowly. Focused on Talon as he was, Tyrion didn't see Karandra's incredulous stare. The boy listened intently as his father continued. I think there are some orcs who can be good. They're just harder to find, is all, Tyrion said gently. Karandra couldn't believe her ears. Her ebbing anger flooded back into her. Really, Papa? Talon asked. I think so, Tyrion replied. Sometimes we need to be careful of how quickly we judge people, son. The boy seemed pleased with the answer. Karandra was not. Despite everything else, she would be damned if she let Tyrion fill the boy's head with such nonsense. Don't tell him that, she hissed. Orcs are mindless beasts who should all be hunted down and killed. How can you even say that, knowing what they've done to our world? What's gotten into you, Tyrion? She yelled, snatching Talon from his arms. Sensing her anger, the boy began to cry. She stroked his hair lovingly as she turned to leave. Don't worry, baby, she said. Your father's just tired. We'll let him get some rest, all right, she said as she left the room briskly without even turning to acknowledge Tyrion. Left alone, Tyrion wandered over to an ornate serving stand and poured himself a cup of chilled wine. Taking a deep sip, he sat down heavily and marveled at how quickly his entire world had turned upside down. Okay, so we're really pressing. I mean, I'm very proud. Score one for me that I predicted it was Eitrigg. Eitrigg, whatever. I don't Eitrigg. I don't know how to say it. That's a tough theme. I think that I guess we're trying to address here is this concept of prejudice and just how hard it would be in this particular situation, and how much damage, psychological and emotional damage, it can do to someone internally and to the people around them, including the next generations, by just embracing and living with so much hatred and fear. All right, we got another episode in the pipe, 5x5. I thank everyone so much for watching and listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time on Lore of Warcraft.